Good morning, everyone. I am Councilmember Albornoz, and just this morning, we woke up to the news that a campaign sign for Senate candidate Angela Also Brooks was defaced in Laurel with KKK symbolism. It was done in a very prominent place in Prince George's County, clearly with the intention of spreading fear and hatred, and unfortunately is consistent with the graffiti-based hatred that we have seen targeting so many members of our community, our Jewish community, our Muslim community, our LGBTQ plus community, our Asian community, our immigrant community. It's troubling, it's unsettling, and frankly, it's terrifying to see what is transpiring in our country and around the world right now. As the proud son of immigrants myself, I know all too well how this makes marginalized communities feel. The number one issue that came up in a recent poll that was done of county residents through public health, the number one issue facing our county residents is mental health. And we know that acts such as the one that we woke up to this morning and the ones that we are experiencing every day are impacting our mental health. Hate speech leads to hate violence. And we have seen too many examples of that, coupled with the permeation of firearms in this country, that is truly troubling and unsettling. But while these are immensely challenging and confusing and difficult times, I do find hope in lots of places. I'm proud that I live in a community that understands the value of making sure that everyone feels welcome and seen. A community that responds when it sees violence in our own community and calls out hate speech. Under the leadership of Council President Glass last year, we established a remarkable committee to build off of the wonderful work for the Committee of Hate Violence and the Office of Human Rights to present recommendations to this body on how we address the hate speech that we are seeing in our community. Those recommendations have been taken very seriously, and we look forward to acting upon them. But those recommendations remind us every day that we all can't do everything, but each of us can do something. Whether it's educating people in our own social and family and professional and community networks, whether it's teaching our children, our grandchildren, our nephews and nieces about the importance of inclusion, seeing people where they are, treating people with dignity and respect, and the power and importance of loving our neighbors. There's so much that we can and should do, and that's why this day is important. It was designated by the United Nations in 2022 to help counter some of the hate speech that we were seeing then, and has it been amplified. And so before turning it over to Director Stowe to make comments, I also want to acknowledge the tools that are being utilized to magnify this hate speech is also something that we have to address, and it must be done at the federal level. Social media platforms have a responsibility to police this behavior, and it's important that we establish federal law that addresses this head on, because if we don't, we risk tremendously more damage to what has already been done in our country. There's a lot on the line this year, and it's important that we call out, even at the highest levels of government and in leadership, when we see something that's wrong. Working every day on this issue and so many more are the people joining me here today. I want to recognize Adila Sharif, the co-chair of the Muslim cohort of the Anti-Hate Task Force. Thank you so much for your leadership. Pablo Blanc, the chair of the Committee Against Hate Violence. Ron Wright, the co-chair of the African American cohort of the Anti-Hate Task Force. And Gabrielle Z, the vice chair of the Committee Against Hate Violence. There are other members who couldn't be here today, but we thank all of you for your commitment and leadership and for all that you do. I also want to acknowledge my colleague and friend Selena, who has been working tirelessly, not just with the Montgomery County Council, but to educate our broader community on what's right and how to unify our community. I now want to turn it over to Director Stowe, who is joining us virtually to make a few comments as well. Director Stowe.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Albornoz, and to our Vice President Stewart. Thank you so much for your leadership this morning. And do want to, before I begin my comments, to certainly recognize and to send our condolences to our Council President in the loss of his father. And we certainly send our sincere wishes for that family throughout this very, very difficult time. So we want to make sure we start with that first. So again, Councilmember Albornoz, thank you for following through on this. I want to add just a few comments. Let me just start off by saying that the freedom of expression, of speech, is a cornerstone of our democracy. But like all other rights, we enjoy the right of freedom to speech has its limits. Hold on a second here. A little technical difficulty here. Hold on a second. Has its limits. Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights from the United Nations states that any advocacy of national and racial or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence shall be prohibited by law. While, my friends, there is no one universal definition, I believe this statement does cover in large part the definition, which includes often targeting messages to individual groups or individuals of certain racial, gender, and religious communities simply because they are representatives of those communities. Hate speech breeding from hatred is like a pandemic. It is resilient and can spread with or without warning, often stoked by misinformation and unquestioned allegations and mistruths, or incidents of engagement with the negative elements of human beings interacting with human beings, having permanent negative impressions lingering for years or sometimes a lifetime. Oftentimes, when you ask someone who spurs such hateful messages why they're doing that, they cannot tell you why. They just simply say they hate, and they just do. We must then, we must do this. We must see it this way. We must see it as we did the present recent pandemic. We identified where the problem is. We called it out. We must signal to our community that this behavior does exist, that unfortunately we have recent verified reports of hate messages that vandalize synagogues and racial slurs printed in our schools and hidden leaflets planted in books in our libraries. Ongoing reports of anti-Muslim, Asian and Pacific Islander and Native Islander and anti-Semitic and LGBTQ plus activity. It appears that no group is exempt. We must call out such behavior as unacceptable in our community and then replace that with statements that show our solidarity of purpose in creating a community that is inclusive and accepting of our many cultures, racial and religious communities. We must inoculate that purpose with acts of understanding, increased our education and engagement with multicultural communities, and seek common ground on controversial issues. And my friends, just simply trying to work it out. Taking action is our next step, and we do so when our best efforts sometimes fail us. The Committee Against Hate Violence is in place to monitor and report acts of hate and violence and to advise the administration and members of County Council and the community at large on strategies to combat acts of hate and hate speech and educate the community on the impact of such incidents on racial, cultural, religious, and LGBTQ plus communities. You've already been introduced to our chair, Pablo Blanc, and our vice chair, Gabriel Zui. Such actions are really unfounded until we pledge with a commitment of ongoing support of the ideals of countering hate speech and divisive activities in our community. And we seal it this way. We pledge to promote hope, respect, and acceptance and opportunity and a safe environment for all of our residents to come together from various life experiences, faith beliefs, and diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds, and to lift up our common humanity, to come together to support all efforts with very specific goals and intents toward peace and justice and understanding, and to speak out against all efforts, both far and near, that seek to foster the destructive elements of racism, hatred and division, intimidation and violence and fear, to come together and convene courageous, frank conversations on issues of concern that are important to all of our community, seeking always the truth and pathways toward reconciliation, to respectfully listen to ideas and perspectives that may offer those that are different from our own, to seek out opportunities to participate and actively engage in educational and peaceful activities, focusing on understanding, acceptance, mutual respect, and unity among all of us who make up our neighborhoods, who make up our communities, our town, our villages, our cities, our county, and all of our people. Because, my friends, that is the Montgomery County way.
Director Stowe, it's so good hearing your voice. It's so good hearing your image. It looks like you're getting your strength back, sir, and we are all fortunate that you are. We look forward to seeing you in person. So I will now read the proclamation. So whereas June 18th is the International Day for Countering Hate Speech, designated for the first time in 2022 by the United Nations to raise awareness of the risk it poses to human rights and the rule of law. Echoing the need to highlight this growing problem, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez stated, "Hatred is a danger to everyone, and so fighting it must be a job for everyone." And whereas forms of hate speech can include the use of derogatory language, disinformation, denial, and distortion of historical events, stereotyping, stigmatization, and individual threats. Research shows that hatred changes the chemistry in the brain because it stimulates the premotor cortex, which is responsible for the planning and execution of motion. This prepares individuals to speak and or act aggressively when feeling hateful, either to defend themselves or attack another person. And whereas hate speech not only affects the dignity and human rights of the individuals targeted, but also of persons belonging to the same minority group or affinity group directly targeted. It affects the participation and inclusion of those who are targeted by it and leads to dangerous divisions in society. Hate speech is a threat to our democracy as a whole. And whereas, in recent years, hate speech has increasingly been spread through social media and across the internet, preventing and combating online hate speech poses specific challenges as it can be disseminated across the world in a matter of seconds. And whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin or their background or their religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." We must all speak up calmly but firmly against hate speech while continuing to develop our own awareness of biases and prejudices and help others to do the same. Now, therefore, be resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland hereby recognizes June 18th, 2024 as the International Day for Countering Hate Speech, and calls upon all residents to counter intolerance and discrimination and advance inclusion and peaceful coexistence where truth triumphs over falsehoods and diversity is celebrated. Presented on this 18th day of June in the year 2024, signed by myself and our council president. Thank you all very much.